I always believed that trust was the foundation of our marriage. For years, I thought we had that foundation. We weren't perfect, no couple is, but I felt secure in what we had. We laughed together, made plans for the future, and shared dreams. But lately, something had shifted. It wasn't dramatic or obvious at first. It was subtle, like the way she'd become distant during conversations, or the way she started guarding her phone like it held the world's secrets. At first, I chalked it up to stress. She'd been working longer hours at the office, often coming home late or not at all. Deadlines, she'd say, brushing it off casually. I wanted to believe her, so I did. After all, isn't that what you're supposed to do when you love someone? You give them the benefit of the doubt. But as the weeks turned into months, I couldn't ignore the little things that didn't add up. Her schedule seemed erratic, and she never explained why. She'd come home exhausted, but it wasn't just physical fatigue. It was something deeper, emotional, maybe. She started avoiding my touch, giving me quick pecks on the cheek instead of the kisses that once made me feel like I was her whole world. The phone was the biggest red flag. She used to leave it lying around without a second thought. Now it was glued to her side, password protected and face down on every surface. When it buzzed, she'd glance at it, her expression unreadable, and quickly tuck it away. I didn't want to be the kind of person who snooped, but the urge was there. I fought it, convincing myself that invading her privacy would make me just as guilty as whatever I feared she might be hiding. And then there was her boss. She started mentioning him more often, his name slipping into conversations casually, almost too casually. She praised his work ethic, his leadership, how he inspired the team. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was ambitious, and I admired that about her. But the way she talked about him felt off. It wasn't admiration, it was something more, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, insecurity can be a dangerous thing. It creeps in and whispers lies, making you doubt even the most innocent gestures. I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid one who couldn't handle his wife having a career and a life outside of their marriage. So I stayed quiet. I smiled when she talked about him and nodded when she said she'd be late again. But inside, I was crumbling. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. It was in the way she avoided eye contact when I asked how her day was. It was in the way she suddenly started taking extra care with her appearance. Even on nights she claimed she'd be stuck behind a desk until midnight. It was in the way she'd laugh a little too hard at her texts, her eyes lighting up in a way they hadn't when we talked in months. I wanted to confront her, but I was scared of the answer. What if my suspicions were right? What if everything I feared was true? That thought terrified me more than anything. It wasn't just the fear of losing her, it was the fear of losing the life we'd built together. The trust, the memories, the promises we made. Could they all be erased with one betrayal? I held on to denial like a lifeline. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she really was just busy. Maybe I'd been neglecting her needs, and this distance was my fault. But no matter how many excuses I made, that gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Trust is supposed to be the backbone of a relationship, but when doubt takes root, it's like a poison. It spreads slowly, infecting everything until all that's left is suspicion and fear. I didn't want to believe she could betray me. But as the signs piled up, it became harder and harder to ignore the truth that was staring me in the face. Something had changed. And I knew sooner or later I'd have to find out what. It happened on a night I'll never forget. She told me she'd be working late again, her tone light and matter-of-fact, like it was just another normal day. But there was something in the way she said it, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't guilt or defensiveness, at least not outright. It was more like an edge of relief, as if she was glad I didn't question her excuse. I told her to be safe and hung up the phone, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in my gut. For weeks, that feeling had been growing louder and more persistent, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. Tonight, though, it was impossible to ignore. Something about her story didn't sit right with me, and for the first time I felt like I couldn't just brush it off. I left the office earlier than usual, unable to focus on work. I told myself I was overreacting, that I'd go home, see her car wasn't there, and realize I'd let my imagination get the better of me. but when I pulled into the driveway, there it was, her car, parked neatly in its usual spot. For a moment, I just sat there staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe she'd forgotten something and come back home before heading out again. That would explain it, wouldn't it? But as I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, I couldn't convince myself. My heart was pounding, my palms slick with sweat as I fumbled with the keys. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, except for the faint hum of the bedroom light filtering down the hallway. I paused, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe she wasn't feeling well and came home to rest. Or maybe. No, I couldn't finish the thought. I took a step forward, then another, the sound of my own breathing suddenly deafening in my ears. The closer I got to the bedroom, the more certain I became that something was wrong. And then I heard it, the sound of muffled voices. Laughter. Cheesy laughter. Laughter that didn't belong to me. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest tightened, and my legs felt heavy as I forced myself to move. Each step up the stairs was a battle, my mind screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't. I needed to know. When I reached the bedroom door, it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. What I saw on the other side shattered me. There she was, my wife, the woman I loved, in our bed. Our bed, and she wasn't alone. Her boss was there with her, their betrayal laid bare in the most intimate, unforgivable way. Time seemed to freeze. I stood there, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but take in the scene that was unfolding before me. My mind struggled to process what my eyes were seeing, like it was some horrible nightmare I'd wake up from any second. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. The weight of the betrayal hit me all at once, a crushing force that left me breathless. This was the woman I had trusted with my heart, my life. The woman I had vowed to stand by through thick and thin. And she had destroyed it all in an instant. I didn't wait for explanations or excuses. I didn't need them. The truth was right there, undeniable and devastating. Without a word, I turned and walked away, leaving everything I thought I knew about my life behind. I didn't say a word. I didn't make a scene. I just turned around and walked out of the house, my legs feeling like lead as I moved down the hallway and back to the front door. My mind was blank, yet racing at the same time. It was as if my body was on autopilot, carrying me forward while my brain struggled to process what had just happened. The night air hit me like a slap in the face as I stepped outside, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. My hands were trembling as I got into the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I sat there for a moment, staring ahead, the events replaying in my mind over and over like a broken record. She had betrayed me. In our bedroom. With her boss. The place where we'd shared so many intimate moments, so many laughs, so many nights of whispered dreams and promises, was now tainted beyond repair. It wasn't just the act of cheating that hurt, it was the complete disregard for everything we'd built together. I started the car and pulled out of the driveway, unsure of where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. Far away. The familiar streets blurred past me as I drove aimlessly, my mind consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, hurt, humiliation. The anger came first, sharp and hot, burning through me like fire. How dare she? How could she? After everything we'd been through, after all the sacrifices I'd made to support her, this was how she repaid me. My hands gripped the wheel tighter as I imagined every argument we never had, every word I wanted to shout at her. But the anger didn't last. It gave way to sadness, a deep, aching sadness that settled in my chest and refused to leave. I thought about all the moments we'd shared our wedding day, the trips we took, the nights we stayed up talking about our future. Were all those moments lies? Was I the only one who believed in them? And then came the humiliation. The thought of her with him, the boss she'd talked about so casually, made my stomach turn. I wondered how long it had been going on, how many times they'd laughed behind my back while I played the trusting husband. The thought of everyone at her office knowing, of being the last to find out, felt like a dagger to my pride. I drove for hours, letting the road take me wherever it wanted. At one point, I pulled into an empty parking lot and just sat there, staring at the dashboard, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. The world outside felt distant and unreal, as though I were watching it from behind a glass wall. I thought about going back, about confronting her, about demanding answers, but the thought of facing her lies, of listening to her try to justify what she'd done, was unbearable. I couldn't do it. Not then. Not when I was still raw and broken. So I kept driving. The only thing I knew for certain was that I couldn't stay. Staying would mean facing her and the betrayal that had unfolded in our home. It would mean reliving the pain every single day, knowing the person I loved most in the world had chosen to destroy everything we had. I needed space. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't do it there. Not in that house. Not in that life. Not with her. I checked into a small motel miles away from home, somewhere off a quiet highway where no one would think to look for me. The room was basic: a bed, a small table, a TV that buzzed faintly even when it was off. It was far from the comfort of home, but I didn't care. Comfort wasn't what I needed. I needed space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to figure out how my entire life had just fallen apart. As I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, the weight of everything began to settle on me. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. I felt numb and raw at the same time, like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. For hours, I just sat there, unable to sleep, unable to cry, unable to do anything but replay the events of the night in my mind. I thought about her, about us, about all the years we'd spent together, building a life I thought was solid and unshakable. Was it all a lie? Had she been pretending this whole time, or was it something that changed along the way? I searched for answers in my memory, replaying every conversation, every moment, looking for signs I might have missed. I thought about her late nights, her guarded phone, the way she'd grown distant. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Longer? The not knowing was its own kind of torture. I felt like a fool, like I'd been blind to the truth staring me in the face. Had everyone else seen it but me? But the questions didn't stop there. They turned inward, cutting deeper than I expected. Was it my fault? Had I done something to push her away, to make her look for something or someone else? I thought about the times I'd been too tired to listen, the arguments we'd had, the times I'd taken her for granted. Was this my punishment for not being a perfect husband? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not just at her, but at myself. I had been so trusting, so willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. I had ignored the signs, brushed off my suspicions, told myself I was imagining things. And now, here I was, alone in a dingy motel room, trying to make sense of a betrayal that had no justification. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. Not entirely. Part of me still loved her, still clung to the memories of the woman I thought she was. But that only made the betrayal hurt more. How could someone who claimed to love me do something so cruel? How could she look me in the eye every day, knowing what she was hiding? The pain was suffocating, but there was also a strange clarity in it. As much as it hurt, I knew this wasn't about me. This was about her, her choices, her selfishness, her inability to value what we had. No matter how much I loved her, I couldn't excuse what she'd done. I spent that night in silence, wrestling with the weight of it all. By the time the sun came up, I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't go back. I couldn't face her, couldn't listen to her excuses or lies. I needed to move forward, even if I didn't know how. For now, the only thing I could do was survive. One moment, one breath at a time. Days turned into weeks as I stayed away, isolating myself from everything and everyone. My phone buzzed constantly in the beginning: calls, texts, even voicemails, all from her. At first, I ignored them entirely, unable to even look at her name on the screen without feeling a fresh wave of anger and pain. She didn't stop trying, though. The messages started off frantic. asking where I was, if I was okay, begging me to come back and talk. Then they turned into apologies, long, desperate apologies where she claimed she could explain everything, that it wasn't what it looked like. I didn't need her explanations. I didn't want them. I'd seen enough with my own eyes to know the truth. Eventually the calls slowed down and the messages became less frequent. I knew she wasn't giving up, she was just waiting, hoping I'd come around. But I wasn't going to. The longer I stayed away, the clearer it became that there was no going back. In the quiet of those days, I spent a lot of time reflecting, trying to untangle my emotions and make sense of what had happened. Betrayal isn't just about what someone else does to you, it's also about what it forces you to confront within yourself. I had to face the truth. The person I loved, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, had made a choice to betray me, and no amount of love or loyalty on my part could undo that choice. I thought about the life we'd built together, the plans we'd made, the dreams we'd shared. They all felt hollow now, like an elaborate illusion that had shattered the moment I walked into that bedroom. How many of those dreams had she been sincere about? How many of those promises had she already broken before I caught her? But the hardest part wasn't letting go of the past, it was imagining a future without her. For so long she had been my partner, my confidant, the person I turned to when I needed strength or comfort. Losing her felt like losing a part of myself. And yet I knew that staying with her would mean losing even more. It would mean losing my self-respect, my peace of mind, my ability to trust. I thought about the man I used to be before all of this, someone who believed in love, in commitment, in the idea that a marriage could weather anything if both people were willing to fight for it. That man felt like a stranger now, naive and foolish. But as much as it hurt to admit, I realized that this experience hadn't destroyed me, it had revealed me. It had shown me what I was willing to tolerate, and what I wasn't. Eventually, I made my decision. I wasn't going back. I didn't need to hear her excuses or explanations because there was nothing she could say that would make what she'd done okay. The trust was gone, and without it, there was no foundation to rebuild on. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the only one that felt right. Walking away didn't mean I wasn't hurt. It didn't mean I wasn't angry or sad or broken. It meant I valued myself enough to let go of something that was no longer good for me. Looking back now, her betrayal taught me one of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn sometimes. The people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. And sometimes the only way to heal is to walk away. I vanished to protect myself, to rebuild, to start over. And while the scars will always be there, so will the strength I found in leaving.